You ever have that game that you see and it makes you say, oh, that looks pretty cool, I bet I'd like that one. But then for one reason or another you never got the chance to play it, whether it be because the money wasn't right or you just never had the time. It even gets to the point where your friends start telling you that you'd like that game. That was God of War 2018 for me. I don't have much of a history with the God of War franchise in general. I played through the first game when I was younger and probably shouldn't have, but hey, what my parents don't know won't hurt them, right? Anyway, that's basically where I stopped with this series aside from a very small amount of time with the sequel. They were fun enough games, but I just never continued on, possibly out of fear of being caught watching this. But this new one on the PS4 looked pretty cool after I saw the trailers, and I kind of figured I would never have the desire to give this one the time of day, so I would watch videos dissecting everything from the combat mechanics, the narrative, I watched that documentary Sony released, I even sat through more than a few GDC talks the team has given on God of War. These breakdowns on how the game ticks and all of the different opinions were fun to observe, but that's all I could really do, watch and study the conversation. And I know we all have games like this, the ones that don't necessarily look bad, but the conversation surrounding it is so interesting that you don't mind being ruined on the game itself so you can understand that conversation. I figured I had just ruined myself on this game by now, and that was okay. I was totally fine with never being able to go into God of War 2018 with my own completely blank perspective. I will have some spicy opinions on this game. Some good, some bad, some neutral, but I'm just telling you that I'm in a weird position to look at this thing as a whole. I'm more or less reviewing the game past its pop culture half-life, so to speak. So it's become more interesting to view as a product than as a game to me. I'm going to do my best to take you through my thoughts as I played it, but bear with me if things get messy. This is God of War 2018. God of War is one of those games that I only had fun with in small bursts. There were moments where I was having a blast, but then I would get smacked in the face with a huge annoyance, or at the very least, things that kept the game out of my must-play category. But the one thing that I enjoyed more consistently was the narrative they decided to tell. Let's begin there, shall we? The switch from Greek mythology to Norse mythology was an interesting enough premise for me, but then they went and made Kratos responsible for a child. The most intriguing moments of this game are when Kratos is being a father, or at least trying to be a father, but doing it in his own way. Because if we remember from the early days, Kratos killed his first wife and daughter, and I'm not sure how that affected him besides the whole attempted suicide thing, but it's the mere fact that this knowledge exists which makes the relationship between Kratos and Atreus engaging. Observing Kratos' strategies to parenthood fail and succeed in interesting ways is fun to watch, and as they go along on their mission, his methods are put to the test, so much so that it pushes him to change, digging up his past in an attempt to save Atreus. This is the other aspect that had me very interested. When glimpses of Kratos' past showed up, I wanted to see what it all meant. I was hoping they would actually answer the question of how Kratos found his way to Midgard, because I didn't know hopping over to an entire other branch of belief was just a Sunday stroll away. But it doesn't seem like something that the narrative is too interested in exploring. The Bifrost might have something to do with it, or maybe gods can just travel between realms like that, but yeah. I think the thing that I found the most interesting about the narrative was the juxtaposition of Kratos' past and his stern but genuine bond with his son, but I suspect that was kind of the whole point. I did think the little episode of Atreus being a dick was short-lived. When he finds out he's a god and he starts ignoring orders and thinking he's all high and mighty, it was more annoying than anything, but mostly because I thought it was going to mean more for his character. After he screws up one time, he makes a total 180 and goes back to the chipper, wide-eyed boy from before. For the short duration of that spat, he didn't listen to you in combat, and would fire off his special abilities and stuff when he felt like it, which was a neat touch. I liked seeing Kratos deal with an unruly kid, but it just kind of felt abrupt. The acting is obviously out of this world though. Christopher Judge as Kratos and Sonny Suljic as Atreus are fantastic. There are several standout moments from each of the actors, but again, it's when they're bouncing off of each other when I really perk up. All of their father-son confrontations are electric. The little conversations in the boat are fun, and seeing them both influence each other as the game progresses is a highlight. And that's not to say anything of Kratos' line towards the end of the game where he finally accepts himself and everything he has done.
We will be the gods we choose to be, not those who have been. Who I was is not who you'll be. We must be better.
Oh man, it's incredibly powerful and a perfect way to cap off his development in this game. The arc that the boys went through isn't anything I didn't ultimately expect, but the way we got here kept me entertained. But as for how this game is presented to us, I'm not as much of a fan. One of 2018's biggest achievements is the single camera shot approach to how it tells its story. Single shots are very impressive in any form of media. It takes a lot of time and planning to pull it off correctly, but I think that goal was a little misguided here. I think it does wonders for making action sequences look dynamic. That's where this approach really shines the brightest. It's so easy to keep track of everything when there aren't 15 cuts breaking up an action sequence. They all drip with style and are better off for having this commitment to cinematic flair. Transitions from gameplay and cutscenes are also smooth as butter and keep you attached to everything the characters are going through, but there are times when it seems to be more of a hindrance. The first issue I see is the amount of downtime this puts the player in during gameplay. I lost track of the amount of sequences where Kratos and Atreus were standing in a room waiting for an elevator to take them somewhere or walking really slowly to a destination. It's all to mask load times that this game would have needed if it was still being played on the PS4. I'm playing this on a sizable PC, and it's perfectly playable on Sony's new console that's main selling point is near instantaneous load times. And yes, I know that these sections give the party time to talk about their situation and how they feel about what's going on, but I felt like I enjoyed the optional dialogue when I was looking for goodies in extra areas more. When I have something to do while I'm listening to commentary from the party. And if the dialogue is that important, then put it in another cutscene. It just feels like a solution to a problem that they handed themselves. And they don't even convincingly commit to it. Seeing the screen turn completely white during trips between realms, the screen turning completely dark when leaving the world servant's mouth, and how about just exiting the game to come back to it another time? These moments really don't fool those who are paying attention to this type of thing in the first place. And the general audience sure as hell doesn't care. It's on the same level as watching Atreus act obviously artificial, warping to Kratos to initiate a scripted moment, or just acting like the dumb computer program he is. It's stuff that doesn't ruin the entire experience, but it pings as an odd moment for people who notice these types of things. And there are cutscenes that I think would have actually benefited from a cut or two. If you watched my recent video on Uncharted 4, then you'd see how single shot moments can work their way into a cinematic game and be just as impressive, but they also don't have to put pieces of the machine at odds with each other in the process. The action sequences benefit immensely from this camera work, but when it starts making the flow of the game suffer, it's probably time for a reconsideration, and this will not be the last time I have words for the camera. But on the whole, the game is a visual treat. I was able to run this baby on maxed out settings with only a little bit of slowdown here and there. The environments are colorful and well laid out. I noticed some cool uses of light and shadow in a few places. The characters all hold up really well for the most part. There are times where the low poly bits are put into focus and it's obvious that they're PS4 era models, but those are really small things anyway. But now that I've given my minimal input on the story and everything, it's time to talk about how much this combat system disappoints me. God of War yearns to be a deep action RPG on top of having an engrossing narrative, but I think there are a few important things that hold it back from being a game that's worth mastering. Let's see, our main man Kratos switches between two weapons to take enemies down. Both the Leviathan Axe and the Blades of Chaos are capable of light and heavy attack strings. There are plenty of other attacks to unlock that are executed with basic commands like holding the input down. A standard block can negate normal attacks, and when timed just right, most moves can be parried and countered. Special moves called runic attacks can be activated by blocking and pressing the light or heavy attack button. Each weapon also has ranged options. Both weapons have light and heavy attack variants of this to put enemies in different states. The Leviathan axe is particularly interesting. A light axe throw is faster and great at repeatedly batting enemies in the head, but if aimed at weaker enemies' legs, it can be used to trip them up, leaving a target vulnerable or immobilized for a short time. And then the heavy attack is great at staggering enemies, but it can also pin airborne enemies to walls for big damage. The Blades of Chaos's ranged attack will hook onto and slam airborne enemies back to the ground, which never got old. And the heavy ranged attack was a horizontal slash that built fire damage. Kratos can also put up his dukes after throwing the axe or just choosing to sheath his weapon. Barehanded attacks build the enemy's stagger bar more quickly than the other two weapons, but they don't deal as much damage. Atreus can also fire light and shock arrows to build stagger or interrupt strong enemy attacks. The combat system works on a fundamental level. The amount of strategy required to be successful in fights has increased from the old games, but while retaining Kratos' brutal nature. There's an impressive amount of interaction to be had with the enemies. The Leviathan axe is a lot of fun to use and it's animated beautifully. The Blades of Chaos are great too. It's fantastic to see such a staple weapon of the series back and in a completely different type of fight. But this is where my issues begin. Different attack strings don't flow into each other as well as one would like. Weaving different combos in between each other feels way more sluggish than it should. For instance, when I want to use Grinding Storm, a move that's activated by holding down the light attack button, it takes so much time to activate this move that it completely breaks the speed of the barrage. The attack might come out quick enough to catch the enemy while they're still staggered, but the other enemies around us are so relentless that it's kind of a deal breaker. If I'm in the middle of a regular old light combo beforehand, it just feels super clunky swapping to another combo. Even another weapon as well. It's totally possible to trip a Draugr with a light throw from the axe and then wail on them with Kratos' fists, but the transition between these movesets is awkward. The attacks themselves can feel awesome with top tier visual effects and solid sound design to punctuate it, but if I can't reliably use them together in a satisfying way, it loses some luster for me. And most of Kratos' arsenal feels this way. Sometimes you can be locked into lengthy animations while the enemy has free reign to use whichever attacks they want on you, which can lead to some unfair feeling deaths. Swapping weapons or doing different moves in the middle of a fight is possible and even required in late game, but it can be a bit of a gamble from time to time. Thus, I tended to stick with the same weapon and attack strings when focused on one enemy, so I didn't get caught with my pants down. Because yeah, that happens quite a lot, let me tell you. So easily my biggest problem with the combat system is the camera. It's always facing in front of Kratos during combat. For some games this is fine, but for a game that's trying to be the kind of reflexive action game which requires spatial awareness of several enemies in a fight, it's almost always frustrating. Enemies have two kinds of flashes to denote the action that the player should take. A yellow flash means the move can be countered and the red flash means you need to dodge. And mostly all projectiles can be thrown back with a counter. Enemies in this game come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Some can't be staggered like others, some require a certain tactic to beat, and some are out of striking distance and require a ranged attack to kill. These things are all well and good stuff, but all of the enemies outside of Kratos' line of sight can also attack freely. In an attempt to remedy the shortcomings of the camera's perspective, a radial damage indicator has been put at the bottom of the screen with arrows pointing to nearby enemies. When enemies are preparing to throw out an attack, their arrow will turn red. This has got to be one of the worst possible ways they could have fixed this problem. The indicator only shows the red arrows. This immediately makes the indicator unreliable because it could be alerting you to literally any attack in the game at any given moment. When you have no solid indication of what the threat is or how it needs to be dealt with, you only know that it is a threat, then how can you be expected to perform optimally? Right here, the indicator was flashing red and Atreus even shouted for me to look behind, but the enemy was caught on a wall. It's impossible to enter any type of zen state and feel comfortable pulling off a combo when these inconsistencies are feeding me false information. You have to assume that any of the red arrows that go off are going to connect with you, and constant uncertainty isn't really a fun thing to play around with. Juggling is one of my favorite things to do in any game I'm allowed to get away with it, and it's great here too, but I have so many other threats outside of my view that I can't focus long enough to do anything fun. The variety of enemies that require specific moves or weapons to beat is great for keeping fights engaging, but when they're all strong enough to take you out in only a few hits, the flaws of this indicator become very clear. Again, my main takeaway for combat is the camera. It has its few upsides, like making one-on-one fights much more intense, bringing us closer into the action than you usually get from games like this, but the cons far outweigh the few pros. This is not the kind of camera you use for an action game like this. I don't know why they kept the camera so close to Kratos and locked it in front of him, but whatever the reason was, it wasn't worth it. Switching priorities from one enemy to the next is clunky, running away to find health leaves you completely to the mercy of our good friend the Indicator, and it makes me scared to commit too hard to any of the fun combos I might want to pull off. Kratos' movement in and out of combat also suffers from the constraints of the camera. There were times when I could have sworn I was controlling Joel. Not only do the two have the same dad jog that they can do in all directions, but the top speed and everything felt way too similar to not notice. Kratos is all about acting and thinking like a warrior. He was a general, for God's sakes. I don't see a warrior strafing and jogging sideways or backwards around a battlefield like this. They even give the man a quick turn, which is so ridiculous for a melee action game like this. It works for Resident Evil 4, but not this. It's maybe saved me once or twice in a pinch, but full control of Kratos' point of view would have done that and then some. There are so many action games that are all about having to keep an eye on enemies that your character isn't facing, but it's completely doable because you can see the whole fight. There's no information that's obscured from you. It honestly feels like the challenge in some of these fights is grappling with the camera. The Dark Elf boss seems like he was designed to move faster than your limited field of view can handle, and the Valkyrie ear highlights a number of the issues I touched on. The Valkyrie fights are more of a test of endurance than skill, right? Their movesets aren't really the challenge in their encounters. Ear has this lunge and slam attack that needs to be rolled away from, and then right after that, she'll do a swipe that you can sidestep. And if you're feeling cheeky, you can do one hit before you'll need to shield bash the block that she's set to do afterwards. She can do 4 sets of these diagonal slashes that just need to be blocked, and then when she rises into the air, she can either do a parryable downward slash or a slam move that's a one-hit kill, but interrupting her with an arrow will reset her back to her lunge slam pattern. That's all. The moveset isn't hard to learn. I just summarized it in a few sentences, but repeating these actions upwards to 30 times in a tiny arena where you can't make too many mistakes is enough to make me want to pull my hair out. On hard mode, her attacks do so much damage, and it's really easy to get cornered with nowhere to roll when she lunges, and that's almost a guaranteed death. The fight doesn't lend itself to any creativity either. She has very set patterns that she rarely deviates from, and if you don't work with her vulnerability window and are ready to go back on the defensive, you'll be restarting that 20-minute fight. It's part of the reason why I couldn't be bothered to finish most of these optional encounters. I feel like I've already beaten it when I was halfway done with the health bar. No new gimmicks are introduced, it's just the same fight for way too long. And there might be some numbers I'm not lining up in these RPG menus, but I don't care. This was one of those cases where I was already not vibing with the combat in the first place, so I didn't feel like wasting my time making incremental choices to upgrade gear for 1 or 2 more points in a stat category I don't even understand. I just equipped the gear that had the higher attack and defense stats. The enemies were still damage sponges that didn't feel like they were balanced properly for those of us who wanted to play the game on a harder difficulty to start out. The higher difficulties feel like they're here for New Game Plus runs. After you've found some health upgrades, maybe put some time into upgrading your weapon, and then tackle the game past normal mode. I am the kind of person who likes to play my first playthroughs on harder difficulty, and the beginning of this game was kinda rough. Using the same few combos repeatedly and doing next to no damage on these enemies was a bad first impression. But as Kratos and Atreus leveled up, the balance curve seemed to catch up to me and it got a lot better as it went along. I know I've been laying into the things I don't like about this combat system pretty hard, but there are things I like. The basics are done very well here. Landing hits and staying on top of enemies feels good, and every so often I had a moment where I was like, yeah, that was pretty sick. Exploration is rewarding when you find upgrades to make your weapon stronger or come across new abilities altogether. Seeing the moments where Kratos and Atreus work together in real time is awesome because it feels like they're actually characters. Finding out little tricks to the combat system like bouncing enemies off walls to make their stagger gauge shoot up, or maybe bounce them off of literally nothing, that works too. There weren't many enemy types that I disliked, but I did think the Revenants disrupted any fight they were a part of, with them being completely invulnerable until Atreus hits them with an arrow, and even then they're only vulnerable for a short time. It was just a little annoying to juggle them on top of the other issues I mentioned. Spartan Rage is helpful in a pinch for the invulnerability, and it can even give you health back if used wisely, but it's not terribly interesting. As it stands, God of War 2018 is a great game on the surface. The story is a little slow to start and a few things make me raise an eyebrow, but overall, it's a beautifully directed and solid story about self-acceptance. But if you're looking for a game to sink hours into learning combos and tech, this isn't the right one. With the RPG elements that seem to exist only to bloat and overcomplicate a generally good combat system, and a camera that comes close to ruining the entire experience for me. I'm sorry, but it's honestly that frustrating. As someone who loves action games to death, it kills me to see this one held back by things it would have been better off without. It's one of those games that does a lot of things pretty well, but only kind of passes on the things that would keep me coming back. I hate to say it, but I expected to like God of War 2018 more than I did. If you're in the market for a nice story with some visually stimulating combat, it's a good time, but I think it's a game that spreads its focus too thin, merely passing in most areas but exceeding only on the cinematic side of things. At the very least, I'm glad to have finally played it. Here's hoping Ragnarok makes some much needed improvements in a few weeks. But anyway, I appreciate you for watching, so thanks for stopping by and have a great day.